All right, my friends, we are diving into this lecture on ideological fascism and totalitarianism. Those are two pretty big words. There is a lot going on in this lecture, a lot of terminology, a lot of things to hear, to listen to remember, to think about. And at the end, you're going to do a bit of a reflection. So I'm going to actually start with the question that you're going to be working on, and that is, how do the concepts of ideological fascism, which you're going to learn about, and Canada's trend toward totalitarianism relate to one another? So what's the connection between ideological fascism and totalitarianism? If you want to pause here, write that question down, think it through a little bit so that you know what you're listening for. You're going to be doing a 300-word response on that question based on the content of this lecture. I put it into a PowerPoint for us because there's a lot happening and I want you to have a better chance of understanding it, remembering it, and using it in your response. So here we go. First, let's start with a basic definition of the word that I'm using, ideological fascism. It's got two parts. The word ideological, which comes from the word ideology. This is just a system of ideas that an individual puts into action through their life. Everybody has an ideology. We all have values. We all have priorities that shape how we think about life and all of the issues that we face in life. So your working ideas and your ideals, this is your ideology. Often it's handed down to us from our family, from our traditions, our education, our church. Those kinds of things shape and form our ideology. And when we talk about ideology in the wider context, so when I'm applying that word to society and culture, then I'm really talking about the ideas and ideals that relate to politics, how the nation is governed, or economics, how money is handled on a government level, or society, the social norms and things that are involved in how we live in the world around us. Okay, that's ideology. Then we have this word fascism, which we've talked about before. Fascism in the traditional sense is an extreme application of nationalism. The idea that you are the best nation and everything should be like your nation, and you need to all have perfect unity within your nation, and it's generally characterized by some form of dictatorship, where one person or a small group of elites control all aspects of society. That includes politics, economics, social norms, etc. And any opposing view is strongly censored or restricted in the name of doing what's best for everybody. Okay, that's fascism. It's absolute control of all areas of life by the state for the good of everybody. So when we put those things together, ideological fascism then is a little bit different from traditional fascism, like we had in the last picture with the picture of Hitler. Doesn't always look like that. Ideological fascism is then a total government control based on ideology rather than nationality. So now you can see what's being censored and what's being perpetuated. So any opposing views are strongly censored and restricted in the name of doing what's right, what's best for everybody, not based necessarily on ethnicity or nationality, but rather on a specific ideological agenda, a way that they want the world to be. Okay, so we have in the past, we've learned a lot about the direction that Canada is heading through our study of history. In the 1920s, 1930s, we saw a lot of political shifts, movements starting to come about, and social shifts in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, more political shifts and economic shifts in the 70s. And then, I mean, today, if we take a look around, we see a lot of what's happening. I'm just going to run through a lot of the prevalent ideologies in the West, the things that are shaping Canada. Most of this should be review, but again, it's a lot of heavy concepts and terminology. So if you're a note taker, be ready. I've got a slide for every definition, every concept. But again, it is a lot, so be ready and pay attention. Here we go. The first thing that we want to talk about is Marxist theory. This is really an undergirding philosophy and theory for all of Western culture right now. It suggests, this is how it started, it suggests that the problems we experience in society are caused by economic gaps between the classes. So you have the working class and the upper class, those who have wealth, and the idea is that the rich people of society are continually and constantly oppressing the working class and holding them down and taking all power for themselves, and the upper class is controlling the lower class. So Marxist theory really allows us to separate the world according to groups of people, and it's usually always defined by the oppressor and the oppressed. So someone is always being oppressed, and there's always an oppressor to blame for it. Okay? It's generally the oppressor is the wealthy upper class who owns businesses, and they're oppressing the lower class. Now this gets applied in economics and takes the form of socialism. So you take from the wealthy, you give to the poor. Now when this results in fair wages and safe working conditions, we really like ideas like this. This makes us happy. But what should we think about this when it results in government funding for able individuals to sit at home and not work, right? How do we feel about it then? That's what we see all around us today. And does separating the world, the people of a society into categories, does that actually promote unity? Does that actually help to build unity and break down those barriers and walls? Does it really address the sin of racism, which they so pointedly say that we have in our society? Does it address the sin of racism and the problem of oppression? Or does it just seek to change the category of power? Does it just seek to change the people who have the majority of power in the West? Okay, that's a big question, and we're going to walk through some of those things. The next set of ideas that we talk through really end up stemming from Marxist theory, which is a humanist idea, stems from really just an atheist understanding of evolution, etc. Okay, so here we go. There's another one that you have thought about before. We watched a video on this. It's critical race theory. This suggests that all of Western society favors people of Caucasian ethnicity, favors white people, okay? And it notes that white people then are inherently racist. So white people naturally think that they are the best and that other races are a lesser form of human to some degree. Okay, it suggests that we need to achieve equality of opportunity for all individuals, black, white, male, female, heterosexual, homosexual. And again, it sounds good up front, doesn't it? But in order to do that, what has to happen? Well, the traditional views and values of white Westerners need to be suppressed and put down, and the views and values of other groups need to take priority in society. Well, what are the views and values that the West has been built on? Well, those are predominantly Christian biblical values, okay? Now, according to critical race theory, we can all live in a happy unity as long as white people stop being racist, men stop being so dominant, and Christians stop telling people that the Bible is the only answer to our problems. Okay? Critical race theory is a lie. It's another attempt to overthrow the traditional norms of Western society, which are directly based on the truths of God's word. The Bible is clear. All people are created valuable and in the image of God. They are image bearers of the King. Black, white, male, female, heterosexual, homosexual. That is biblical equality. Rather than having equality across the board, from the Bible's point of view, what we have is responsibility. God speaks, we respond. Our response is either one of obedience to God's glory and our good, or disobedience, choosing our own law over the law of God, which brings righteousness, joy, and peace. The next topic we have here is, so there's a critical race theory, biblical response notes, feminism, extreme feminism. So feminism, as we see it today, is constant activism and lobbying for what? Equality again between the genders. And again, that word equality. Now we have to remember that men and women are created equal under God, but not equal in the sense that we are the same. We are different, very different. God did this on purpose. We call it complementarianism. It's the idea that God designed men and women with different gifts, different strengths, different abilities, different emotions, different sensitivities in order to complement one another in working together in the task of filling the earth and subduing it, in the task of developing God-honoring families and God-honoring societies. So men and women equal under God, very different. Next big word is egalitarianism. This one you're probably a little bit less familiar. It essentially summarizes all that we've been talking about already. Much of what is false in the teachings above is based on this concept of egalitarianism. It's the idea that everybody deserves equal rights and opportunities. Okay? Sounds good again up front. Let's talk about it. It doesn't seem to matter whether people deserve what they get or whether or not they are responsible for the things that they lack. We want to take from those who have, whether that's money, authority, political presence, whatever it may be, and we want to give it to those who do not have it. Again, it's used to push aside the seemingly oppressive traditional values, which are based on biblical truths, and to make room for rebellion against God. Not just that the rebellion against God would go unpunished or uncriticized, but that it would be openly supported and celebrated. So we see this in things like the Pride Parade, as well as Trudeau's announcements surrounding abortion as a women's right. The Liberal government is committing $1.4 billion to women's health in other nations. $1.4 billion per year of money going to fund abortions and contraception in nations that aren't even Canada. That's our tax dollars going to support abortion in Africa. Okay, that's what's happening. $1.4 billion every year. Egalitarianism in Canada today, it doesn't just push for equality among different people groups, but the erasure of people groups altogether. So again, you can see the logical confusion between Marxism and egalitarianism. So for example, the goal isn't just to treat men and women fairly. The goal is to erase the concept of biological gender. So we see that in modern gender ideology, etc. The goal isn't to provide same-sex couples the opportunity to marry and have children, but to dismantle the concept of a traditional family altogether. On a birth certificate in Canada, you're actually allowed to put up to 4 parents on a child's birth certificate. 4 parents. How does that work? When one man and one woman can procreate. At any rate, egalitarianism, you can see, is really a self-defeating concept. It doesn't hold up to sound logic. It's not supported by science, because in an effort to erase distinctions, for example, between male and female, you have to first actually identify the distinctions, and then you have to treat them very differently from each other, which doesn't really create any sameness. So in order to create that sameness, you have to treat people very differently, which inevitably leads to the benefit of some at the expense of others. Not very egalitarian, is it? Here's a helpful example to show the absurdity of egalitarianism. So did you know that the life expectancy of a woman is about 7 years longer than the life expectancy of a man? Now, that doesn't seem fair, does it? That is unjust. Egalitarianism would say, okay, so men are entitled to the same opportunity as women at a long and healthy life. So therefore, men need to receive better health care and ought to work shorter hours than women to increase their life expectancy. And that would help create equality in life expectancy. Of course, that doesn't make any sense, okay? Egalitarianism breaks down right from the start. Another tool for the perpetuation of Marxism in our culture is historical revisionism. This is essentially judging events and people of the past based on societal values of the present. So great historical figures aren't being remembered fondly for the great things that they've done, but rather they're being criticized, or in our culture, canceled for the things that they thought or did that are now, however many decades or even centuries later, are considered unacceptable. We watched a video on this from What Would You Say, and they called this historical snobbery. It's based on the humanist idea of social progress or social evolution. It's the belief that humans are getting more and more socially mature, more tolerant, more accepting, more open. What it does, it allows people to think that they are morally superior to the people of the past, that somehow we are better people. We actually fall into this temptation really quickly and really easily. I'll just give you two quick tests. The first, as teenagers, how do you relate to your parents? Okay, you love them and you respect them, sure, but how often do you think this way? You just don't understand my struggles, or I'll do what you say, but really, I think I know better on this one. Even that mentality that comes in. And again, the struggles of teenagers in this day and age are real and are difficult, but to subconsciously or to reject the knowledge or experience of our parents, that's natural to us, right? We feel that that somehow we know better in all of this, and that's exactly what's happening with historical revisionism. A second test: how do we think about the people of the Bible? This one's really interesting to me because I think that we often think of the people of the Bible like Moses and Noah and Abraham and even the apostles. Sometimes we think of them as quite primitive or unintelligent, like somehow we here 2,000 years later have become so much smarter and we understand so much more about life, and that's simply not true. Think about a few great biblical people. David was a spiritual giant, the likes of which are rarely seen today. Paul was a literary genius. He wrote systematic theologies so deep that our tiny little brains can barely comprehend them. Consider Solomon. Solomon was the wisest man who ever lived. Or Daniel, who rose to a position of political prominence. He oversaw one of the most prosperous kingdoms in the world's history. So what we do here, it's simply not true, and we have to be careful because the Bible clearly teaches that all have fallen short of the glory of God. All people have a deceitful and selfish heart, and all people need a savior. We see accounts throughout biblical history and human experience, more recently and all around the world right now, of incredible injustices and human rights violations being committed, just to highlight a handful of them. I gotta go back. Can't. We see it in abortion. There's more deliberate murders happening now than ever before in history. That's modern day genocide. We see it in sex trafficking. It's modern day slavery. It's far worse slavery than we think when we think about what is slavery. Sex trafficking is worse, and there's far more of it happening today than slavery in any other point in human history. We see it in domestic violence, child abuse, alcohol abuse, drug abuse, the corruption of mega corporations around the world and oppressive governments around the world. We see it in social media, individuals hiding behind their screen, attacking others, bullying, harassing people who disagree with them on a particular issue. We see it in the rise of suicide rates and depression and the struggles of life. In summary, to think that we are somehow morally advanced and more mature than people of past generations is simply foolishness from a biblical perspective. The end result of revisionist history in our day, along with the Marxism, feminism, critical race theory, and all the rest, is really the attempt to erase Christianity and biblical norms from their place of prominence in Western society. And again, even if we don't think that these organizations and industries and the government are trying to deliberately erase God from society, even if we don't think that, you have to understand The devil is always at work. The devil is always trying to destroy Christianity. The devil is always here to steal, kill, and destroy, and he's here to destroy even your faith in Christ, and he'll do it by whatever means possible. With that, we head on to, so that's the ideology part of things, okay? The ideological fascism that we're experiencing right now. What we get into in the second part of this lecture, it's a little bit shorter, I think, is the method of the madness, totalitarianism. This is how they're going to accomplish all of this equality and harmony and unity. And totalitarianism is a political situation in which the government steps in to take control of more and more areas of life so that they can control what people are doing, saying, even thinking about society and about all of these issues and values and priorities that we've already highlighted. So we often think of a totalitarianism government, a totalitarian government, as one that is obviously evil, coming in with military force or stopping all opposition and controlling every move that you make in a really vicious or violent or forceful way. But that's not always how it comes. It often comes with a smiling face, with good intentions, with your best interest at heart. And we have to remember, even in 2 Corinthians 12, it tells us that the devil comes as an angel of light. So we shouldn't be surprised when we come across something that looks appealing, that feels good or seems right to our human sensitivities, and yet it is poison, it is death, it is wickedness. So where do we see some of this friendly totalitarianism coming into play today in our society? Well, one of the biggest things that's been used throughout history to perpetuate or spread a particular secularist, humanist ideology and agenda is the public education system. I love this diagram. Teacher comes around and she is conforming all of the students to their thoughts. And in a certain sense, you could say, hey, Mr. V, that's what you're doing right now. But I hope that we can see that what I'm trying to do is bring you a biblical perspective on everything that's happening right now. And you should, like the Bereans, you should go back and you should test what I say against Scripture and against what other good Christian Reformed writers are saying and thinking and doing. But this is public education. This is education of any sort, really, in a lot of ways. It just depends on what shape you want the teacher to form your thoughts into, or what your parents want those thoughts to be modified or somewhat controlled or changed by. So again, if you control education, you control what people hear, you control what people read, you control what they are taught from a very young age all the way through, and certainly this will affect how they think. You could say the same about public health. Public health is, right now, we see it's based on very non-biblical ideas about health and the norms for secular society and our government. And for instance, that's how contraception and abortion become women's rights issues or women's health concerns, and that's how they're paid for by public tax dollars. It's ideological. It's not science. It's based on an ideological agenda. I had to put the COVID protocol on there for obvious reasons. Another tool that they use is controlling the economy. One of the big things right now, green movement, carbon tax, all that sort of thing, the idea that humans are the cause of all the destruction of Earth and that humans are the solution to it. It's a direct rejection of biblical stewardship. It's an obsession with humans needing to save the planet because the planet is on the brink of destruction. And it's built into our everyday lives, this ideology, through excessive taxation and, again, education and these kinds of principles that keep coming up and around in our humanist agenda. And it doesn't necessarily need to be done by the state. So public education, public health, taxation, those are state-governed areas. But we see it a lot now in private industries. For instance, the media companies, whether it's social media or mass media would be like news media, online newspapers, etc. But these industries are within certain legal restrictions. They are free to do what they want to do, and everybody uses them. So everybody sees, hears, reads what they allow us to, okay? What does it say when every major news source in North America, with the exception of one or two, is preaching the exact same message, preaching all of the things that we've discussed earlier already in this lecture? And then what about social media, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat? They have a monopoly on communications worldwide. That means you only hear something, you only see something or read something because they allow it. What happens when they stop allowing you to publish your thoughts and opinions? Or what happens when the rest of the world harasses you and censors you, shuts you up because of your thoughts and opinions, because they're different from the rest of the people? Again, they end up controlling how you think in the end. It's ideological, okay? This is what I'm calling ideological fascism, okay? The idea that someone, something, some agenda, somehow seeks to control how you think, control how you behave, control what you value, control what you prioritize according to a specific agenda for their own interest, although they say it's for the good of everybody. This whole thing makes Bill C-10. I'm going to talk about just two things that are going on right now in Canada, legislative action that's happening. This is a bill that's currently moving through the legislative process in Canada. It gives government the oversight of online communications. Okay, it allows them to see what you are doing online more clearly. They're already doing that, but more than that, it allows them to control and censor you online. Okay, now, they say that it's only happening for professional publishers right now, so like news outlets and other organizations and groups, etc. But basically, what it does is it gives the government now the ability to remove or silence any media publications online that they deem would be incompatible with the idolatry, that's true, with the ideologies that Canada is trying to perpetuate and promote. So anything that disagrees with that would be labeled as misinformation or even dangerous or even hate speech toward other Canadians, okay? But even if it is just for major organizations, aren't those organizations owned by people, Canadians? Shouldn't they have the freedom to say what they want to say? Whether it's agreeable or disagreeable, even whether it's right or wrong, people have the freedom to be wrong and state their opinion and be corrected and have a dialogue over those types of things. Shouldn't we have the freedom to think for ourselves, believe what we want to believe? It shouldn't be labeled as misinformation or hate speech just because we disagree with the driving ideology of secular humanism being promoted in Canada today. Jagmeet Singh, he's the leader of the NDP. He notes that his party supports stronger regulations of misinformation and hate speech on social media platforms. But again, what constitutes misinformation and who gets to decide what is hate speech? From the Bloc Québécois, MP Martin Champoux, he said that the free speech concerns put forward by the Conservatives are overblown. He says there's no need for that on this bill. We just need to get this bill passed. Take a look at another one. It's Bill C-6. You're pretty familiar with it. There's a good chance that this gets passed into legislative law even in the next couple days. The quote there, according to Bill C-6, this is directly from the bill itself, everyone, including mom and dad, who knowingly cause a person who is under the age of 18 years to undergo conversion therapy is guilty of an indictable offense and liable to imprisonment for a term not more than 5 years, or they're guilty of an offense punishable on summary conviction. What does that mean? Well, basically, under Bill C-6, it will be a criminal offense for parents and anyone else, pastors, teachers, friends, etc., to instruct a struggling or confused child in the biological basis for gender or in the virtue of sexual purity. It will be a crime to promote the very teachings of the Bible when Jesus says, "He who made them at the beginning made them male and female." And he said, "For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, the two shall become one flesh." That teaching will be illegal under this bill. So if my child or you or your children fall victim to LGBT pushers at school or in the media or wherever else, Bill C6 will rob parents and teachers and anyone of their right to object to that. I will not be permitted to teach my children or correct their thinking and behavior on this issue. I won't be permitted to bring them for pastoral counseling. I won't be permitted to bring them to a Christian counselor or a Christian therapist. I won't even be permitted to pray with you if you're going through these struggles. Okay, so you can see how this all kind of ties together in the ideology that's coming through and how it's going to be controlled and perpetuated. So you see the agenda. The agenda is, the short of it, is the dismantling of biblical Christian norms and replacing them with humanist ideology. How does that happen? Totalitarianism, big government stepping into your life at every turn, controlling things. So your task is to take all of that and just show me what you know. Show me what you've learned by connecting the concept of ideological fascism and Canada's trend toward totalitarianism. How does that relate to each other? And maybe a little bit of a Christian response at the end, okay? So go ahead and take that on today.